President Joe Biden and Speaker Kevin McCarthy are making the victory rounds on their 11th hour debt ceiling agreement, but their boasting could be premature because at least 29 House Republicans have said that they would vote no on the bill because it doesn't cut spending enough. That includes Representative Bob Hope of Virginia, who downplayed the threat of a default as a, quote, silly, scary narrative. Nonetheless, McCarthy did earn the support of three high-profile Republicans, Freedom Caucus members Thomas Massie, Jim Jordan, and Marjorie Taylor Greene late last night. The House is expected to hold a floor vote on the deal today around 8 p.m. The country is currently set to default on June 5th.
The Congressional Budget Office's report on the agreement was released last night. It seems the bill's controversial hike in work requirements for SNAP beneficiaries will actually increase spending and enrollment in the program overall due to key exemptions. Here's Speaker McCarthy defending the work requirements from Capitol Hill yesterday.
For things we bought that we can return, like COVID money, money to China and others, we're bringing that back. We might have a child that has no job, no dependents, but sitting on a couch. We're going to encourage that person to get a job and have to go to work, which gives them worth and value. We're going to look at other things, too, to make the economy stronger.
Got to put all those children without dependents to work. Joining us now to weigh in is economic policy analyst and rising guest host Jessica Burbank. Sorry, Jessica. It's so good to see you here on the other side of the camera. What do you make of that statement from Kevin McCarthy and the posture that Republicans are taking right now toward the debt ceiling?
Yeah, good to be with you all on the other side of things. But yeah, Kevin McCarthy, I mean, you're getting all this political posturing from these folks who make it seem like it's really noble to cut public spending, which it's not. People are quite upset that the current dollars they pay into the U.S. government and in their state and local taxes are not being spent on things that really matter to them. It turns out when people's tax dollars go towards things that they care about, like school for their kids, like better roads, and they really see the outcome of the dollars they put into the government, they don't mind it as much. I think the reason that people are upset when they hear, oh, the public deficit or the debt is at X number, it's because they don't know where that money's going. And quite frankly, the Pentagon doesn't know either. Whenever we talk about the deficit, we have to talk about the $858 billion that is approved in defense spending to fund the Pentagon when the Pentagon hasn't passed an audit. And so they're proposing all of these cuts to public programs that really matter for people and holding the average economic worker hostage so that they can pass essentially austerity measures. And it's ridiculous.
I mean, I also think we should cut the Pentagon's budget in addition to everything else. Polls find that I'm looking at CNN, 60% of people support raising the debt ceiling alongside spending cuts. I think people, while you're right, individual programs, some of them are more popular than others. I think the American people's broad sentiment is that their money is not being spent well, is being spent inefficiently, that there's a lot of loss and a lot of bureaucracy, and also that people should, if they're getting help from the government, they should have to work for it. That's the logic, at least, of the work requirements for SNAP, although when you dig into the details, this is actually going to add to the deficit because it's going to enroll more people in the program, and double-checking work requirements doesn't actually save any money because then you have to hire people to double-check them. Mm-hmm. So it's very confused on that front. But what would you say to Americans, who I think is a significant number, if not an outright majority, who do want, in theory, think we're spending too much or we're spending beyond our means, and it needs to be cut back, even if then when you say, well, okay, here's this program, let's cut it, they say, no, not that one, no, not that one, no, not that one.
I would say it's just simply not true that it's the case that we're spending, quote, too much money. So it is true that not all of the dollars that fund the public budget are raised through tax revenue. They're issued through bonds. Is it always necessary to issue bonds to have a public budget? No. Do other countries around the world have debt limits? No. It's a handful of countries. It's unnecessary to say we cannot spend more than this arbitrary number. There's no math that goes into it. There's no number where they say this would be too much and unsustainable. To have an economy grow, you need to put dollars into it. We can think of dollars as kind of a tool to mobilize land, resources, tools, machinery. You need to spend dollars to be productive. And so if we were to eliminate the public budget, we would really hinder our ability for our economy to grow. And that's really what they're doing here. And so to say, we need to increase work requirements for people to get SNAP benefits, that's a bit absurd when our monetary policy right now is to raise interest rates to make it more difficult for people to borrow money to, again, mobilize resources and be productive economically. That means there's going to be less people investing in businesses and starting businesses because it's more expensive to take bank loans out. And so there's going to be less jobs. That's their intended purpose. Jerome Powell's intended purpose in his report by the end of the year is to make another additional 2 million people jobless. So to add this requirement that you have to have a job in order to receive SNAP benefits when their intentional plan, the federal government, is to make more people unemployed, it just doesn't make sense. So it's bad fiscal policy all around. We could get rid of the debt limit entirely and fund public programs to put real productive capacity to use. The unemployed population, there's no reason they shouldn't be working. In fact, we're actually leaving real productive capacity on the table by intentionally keeping a population of people unemployed. That's entirely unnecessary. So it's a disaster that they've created. Why? Because when working people have low wages and are desperate for whatever job they can find because they're kept intentionally unemployed and they're not given an alternative to feed themselves by something like SNAP benefits or other social safety net programs, now they're pretty easy to be exploited. They're willing to work for long hours, take jobs for low wages. That's really good for the corporations that a lot of our elected officials are shareholders in.
I think that's a really good point, Jessica. Now, President Biden said this weekend he will not consider proposals to do away with the debt ceiling entirely, but that he is open to looking into the 14th Amendment for future debt ceiling fights. Jessica, how credible do you think that is? And what do you make of the way the Progressive Caucus, other progressive leaders have been addressing this crisis, accepting the framing that we shouldn't be looking at raising revenue or cutting the military budget right now, and negotiating over these SNAP benefits and TANF benefits in a way that initially they said they would not do?
Yeah, just Biden saying that at all is comical, because it's like, if you have this option to avoid the crisis we're in, and you're saying, well, if I use my power given to me by the Constitution, that might be controversial. More controversial than allowing the government to shut down and intentionally having the US government default on their obligations, I'm not sure which is more controversial. It just goes to show his moral priorities here, because he does have the power through the 14th Amendment, and it's not really a power, it's an obligation. To ensure that the public debt shall not be questioned. So prior administrations have actually sent troops to the Federal Reserve and said, you have to issue the bonds to fund the spending because that's your constitutional duty. Congress has passed this budget. And so the fact that he decided not to do that now, but said, maybe I'd consider it in the future, it's clear what his political priorities are. He's not questioning whether or not it would be legal for him to invoke the 14th Amendment here. He's just saying that's politically not his choice of what to do right now. So Biden could have avoided this crisis altogether. He chose not to. And so there are liberals and there are Democrats who also are very down with cutting social safety net programs. This is neoliberalism, classic neoliberalism. The fact that progressives are working with the liberals who are pushing this austerity politics of cutting social programs that's really going to hurt working people, you shouldn't be working with them at all. You should be telling the story of what's actually happening here, because at some point, you've got to say, I'm not going to work with them because there's no ends that they're going to achieve that is good for the American people. So what am I going to do? What's my position of power as a member of Congress? Well, people will listen to me when I talk. So I'm going to tell the American people what's actually going on, that the debt ceiling is being used as a fear-mongering tactic to enforce this game of chicken and force people to take away things that they're entitled to. This is their government. They work very hard to provide not only tax dollars that they pay into it, but also they increase productivity through their day-to-day work, and they're not paid for the full value of their labor. Where is that going? To the board, to the shareholders, to the CEOs and owners of corporations. And they're entitled to the fruits of their labor. That should come to them through public programs, through good schools, through infrastructure, through healthcare, and it's not right now. So when they talk about social safety nets and those who receive the benefits of them, those people being leeches or freeloaders, it's actually quite the opposite. It's the people who are exploiting our labor that are the real freeloaders, and then the people that they give lobbying money to, and people who are elected officials who have shares in these corporations, they're making money off of the people they're calling leeches and saying we need to cut the spending for. And so it's all entirely backwards the way they frame this narrative. And it's really important that progressives tell this story too, not just people like us in media.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Bree.